Welcome back. As you are going to notice in the other example videos, this one came up on my lap halfway through filming the examples for the different materials. And so this is what I'm going to be painting around until he decides to move, because he enjoys a good cuddle. So I will angle this over here where it needs to be. So I apologize in advance for the excessive snoring you're about to hear. Yeah, you're a good boy though. Yeah, I love you. Oh, I need my arm just for a second. Yeah, I gotta angle this so people can see my palette over there. Okay, there. Now you can come back again. Oh, big boy. Yeah, you're such a big baby. So, yeah. Puts his head on my shoulder. Oh, for heaven's sake. When your studio assistants aren't very helpful, but you love them very much anyway. So I'm going to be continuing on with the next layer, which I think I'm going to apply wet to the dry, as you'll see given examples of in the other videos as well. Basically, the first videos for each of the other surfaces will be example videos, so that you can see how everything reacts to each other. And I'm going to you can see why I waited until this was dry before I start applying other colors, because it can get very muddy if you mix your warm colors with your cool colors. What you end up basically with is mud, which, as much as we all love to play in the mud, it's not necessarily good on a canvas. So I do apologize for the snoring, but you can see how when you layer one layer over top of the other, the layer underneath does actually show through. And if you're like me and you like drips, you just need to borrow a hand, my noodle, thank you. Then you can stand it up like this. And like I said, because it's such a small surface, I'm not using my spray bottle that I usually use. And you can just take some water across the top, and you see how it just dribbles down. And that will give you some of those lovely drips, if like me you enjoy those. I can't help it. I'm just going to encourage a couple down here just for fun. But you can see how it shows through the blue in the back. And it's the same technique that I use for my larger paintings. The only difference is this is just a smaller surface. So I make my marks, I set my color on, and I just keep working it until I feel like that's interesting, and then I stop. And I might take some of that off, and then take some of the lighter turquoise, and apply some of that here and there, just because I enjoy that light turquoise so much. And you can see it's going to drip on its own sometimes too, because it's already wet. And right now, we're still just doing our first layer. Like we're just, I guess this is technically our second layer now. But none of this is the final painting. None of this is any planning. We're not saying to ourselves we're painting a specific thing. Right now, we are just creating interest in the background. This is all background work. So none of this is final. None of it will probably stay. We don't know. It might. Some of it will probably show through in the end. But that's the wonderful thing about this technique, is there's no real super planning to it. I'm just going to turn it so you can see a little bit better. Try not to make too much of a mess while I'm doing it. But I'm just going over and letting it run because it will create, this is the same technique I use on those big canvases, because what it does is it creates interesting drips and textures and shapes and things that we might want to use later. And I'm not planning where I'm putting it, I'm just kind of putting it wherever it looks interesting. The idea is that anytime you use a color, and this is just sort of an artsy thing, anytime you use a color somewhere, you have to use it 2 other places. So you want to have like 3 spots where you have the same color or the same pattern, because what that does is creates balance even if there's asymmetry to your painting. Just gonna give it a... You can see it's very simple. I'm just doing this one-handed, mind you, because I've still got him sleeping on my lap. But you can see what it does as far as creating just interesting shapes and things that happen. And that's part of why it's such an interesting technique, is because he snores like a boss. If you can imagine that in my ear, he likes to sleep with his head on my head at like 2 o'clock in the morning when he decides to come and have a cuddle. That's what I hear in my ear. Very conducive to sleep. Well, actually, I can't sleep without hearing him snore anyway. It's become such a part of every day now that I literally can't sleep unless I hear it. And I'm just going back to some of the places where I've already applied that color and just reapplying it. And you don't have to worry about your edges or anything right now. That'll be like one of the finishing things that we'll do. So we're just going in. Like I said, this is a cool layer, so the next layer will probably be a warm layer. And if you want, you can go through each layer. You can do the meditation again, so that each layer you have individual colors and feelings and associations. And it'll make it easier when you go later on to pull out symbols, because your mind will already be thinking in those associations. So that's something to consider for later. And when I start doing the details for these layers and the different symbols and things, I'm going to put on some nice music. And then we'll enjoy that. And I think I'm going to leave that right like that. I like that, how that's going. And if you get, you can see how much, this is why I say with the big paintings that you have to put down a drop cloth, because it just runs off the canvas. But if you get it, if you find that you like what's happening, then you can just lay it flat. And the drips will stop where they are, where they're at. You won't have to worry about losing something interesting. All right. So, and that is our second layer, which is our cool layer for me. Could be a warm layer for you. And this is my snoring sleepy beastie. And we will be back soon.